Let's start by looking at the foundation of Meta's business model, formerly Facebook, of course, and how it's been rooted in one thing: data. The company essentially built its empire on collecting and monetizing user information for targeted advertising. And while this has made them immensely profitable, it's also opened the floodgates for a range of privacy concerns.
And it's not like this is a new worry, is it? I mean, targeting ads sounds pretty harmless, but the extent of the data they collect, honestly, it's mind-blowing.
Exactly. And just recently, the Federal Trade Commission released a damning report highlighting how pervasive Meta's data practices are. The FTC found their user and non-user data collection, yes, even non-users haven't escaped this, puts people at risk of identity theft, stalking, and even mental health issues. But you could argue that we saw the red flags much earlier.
Oh, the warning signs were there, like that Beacon program back in the late 2000s.
Ah, yes, Beacon. It was supposed to be revolutionary, integrating user activities on third-party sites right into the Facebook newsfeed. Bought a new top online? It'd show up for all your friends to see. But it wasn't long before the backlash started pouring in.
Can you blame people? It was basically plastering your private life on the internet, whether you agreed or not.
True, and Facebook eventually had to scrap Beacon in 2009, but the damage was already done. It left people questioning just how much control they truly had over their information. And that question only grew louder with the 2010 profile exposures, a time when basic server issues allowed people's private data to leak online.
So basically, trust was tanking. It even led to movements like Quit Facebook Day. Remember that?
Yes, and while the numbers weren't staggering, the sentiment spoke volumes. People wanted better privacy controls, but even when Facebook introduced new settings, they often felt inadequate or overly complex.
Not to mention how confusing some of those controls were. I mean, even Mark Zuckerberg's sister had a privacy slip, and that says a lot, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The core issue was, and to some extent still is, that users often don't fully understand what's being done with their data or how to safeguard it effectively. Add to that the systemic vulnerabilities Facebook faced during this period, and you've got the perfect storm for rising distrust.
And still, incidents just kept piling up. One patch after another, but it didn't really fix the bigger problem, did it?
No, it didn't. And this pattern of breaches and inadequate responses set the stage for even more serious data scandals down the line.
This pattern of data, breaches and user mistrust culminated in one of the most shocking incidents of recent years, the colossal breach of 2021. It exposed over 533 million user records, revealing names, locations, email addresses, and even phone numbers. Imagine your personal information just sitting in some hacker's forum.
And the worst part, Facebook didn't even notify those affected, did they?
No, they didn't. Their stance was that users shouldn't be concerned because it was old data. But that's hardly reassuring. I mean, for the average user, does it matter how old the data is when your phone number could still be used for scams or worse?
It just feels like a betrayal, doesn't it? People trusted the platform with that information, and this happens. And I bet this wasn't even their first big scandal of that kind.
Correct. Let's rewind a bit to their biometric data issues. Remember the tag suggestions feature? Meta ended up facing a lawsuit in Illinois for violating the Biometric Information Privacy Act. They had to settle for a staggering $650 million in 2021.
And that case went on for years, didn't it? What exactly was the problem?
It was about facial recognition. They were using people's photos, their facial data, without proper consent. What made it worse was that this wasn't opt-in. It was enabled automatically. And now, with AIs becoming smarter, these kinds of privacy abuses take on even more alarming implications.
Oh, that's the thing. It's like they didn't think people would care or notice. But when they were caught, it was just damage control. Right?
Entirely. And speaking of damage control, another controversy was Meta's handling of location data. They tracked users' locations through their mobile app, even if those users had explicitly disabled location tracking. It sparked lawsuits, as you'd expect, and raised serious questions about the ethical responsibility of such practices.
Wait. So setting your location to off didn't actually mean it was off?
Exactly. They argued it helped deliver better ads, but you can see why that explanation didn't hold water with regulators or privacy advocates. People want control, the ability to say, no, you don't get this information. Instead, it felt like Meta was always one step ahead, making sure they could take a little more than users realised.
And that's why trust keeps eroding, right? Once you lose faith in how your data is handled, it's pretty tough to regain that confidence.
Absolutely. And what's alarming is that these breaches and these controversies seem to follow a pattern, one that Meta can't seem to break out of.
That erosion of trust doesn't just affect how users see the platform. It can spill out into real-world consequences. For example, did you know that many employers now rely on social media profiles to vet potential hires? It makes you wonder just how much of your digital self ends up shaping life-changing decisions.
Wait, you mean they're out there scrolling through your vacation photos and posts about your favourite TV shows?
Exactly that. They're checking for red flags, comments, photos, anything that might paint you in a less than professional light. Some surveys even suggest they look for evidence of things like heavy drinking or even negativity in your posts. The ethical question here is, should they?
Yeah, because what you share with your friends doesn't mean it's fair game for your boss or a hiring manager. That feels wrong on so many levels, doesn't it?
It really does. And this is where it gets tricky. When you sign up for these platforms, aren't you kind of agreeing to be, well, public to a degree?
Right, but people still deserve a bit of context. I mean, a silly post from, 10 years ago shouldn't haunt someone's career now, should it? Where does Meta draw the line on what's private?
Precisely. And this ties into the broader question of whether these platforms are doing enough to protect users' intent when they share something. But let's take this one step further. Meta's infamous facial recognition system, the tag suggestions feature, brought this debate into sharp focus, pun intended.
Yeah, I remember that one. It was like Meta was saying, we'll recognise everyone's faces automatically, don't worry about it. Like, no thanks.
Well, they eventually faced legal heat over this, particularly under Illinois' Biometric Information Privacy Act. The worry was that this technology could be misused, with people's faces being tagged and recognised without proper consent. Not to mention, this kind of data has chilling implications if it's hacked or misappropriated.
And let's be honest, it wasn't exactly reassuring that the feature was opt-out rather than opt-in. Imagine being automatically included in something that tracks your face. It's just a bit creepy, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, and privacy advocates were quick to flag that. Their outcry led to that major settlement we mentioned earlier, with Meta coughing up hundreds of millions in legal penalties. It's just another notch on the belt of controversies they've faced.
But here's the thing. These kinds of stories paint a bigger picture, don't they? It's not just technical or legal blunders anymore. It's a question of trust. Like, how do you trust a platform that's consistently made decisions you never had a proper say in?
Exactly. And this trust issue has only intensified with the stories users tell, whether it's their data ending up in the wrong hands or facing unintended consequences simply because of a photo or comment. It all comes down to how much control platforms like Meta give back to the user.
Right? Because at the heart of it, people just want to feel like their private lives are, actually private. So where does that leave us?
Well, it leaves Meta with a massive task. Not just fixing the tech or paying their way out of lawsuits, but fundamentally rethinking how they handle our information. They've got to rebuild trust, and that isn't something you can do overnight.
And for us, the users, maybe it's about being more cautious too. What we share, who we trust with our data. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It really is, and that's all for today. If anything, I think this conversation is a reminder that the digital age demands a new kind of awareness, both from companies and, frankly, from each of us. So until next time, stay mindful out there.
Cheerio for now, everyone. And remember, think before you click.